everybody. What a room of luminaries. I'm in awe. I'm so happy to have all of you here today. If I haven't met you personally, my name is Corey Madden, and I'm lucky enough to be the director of the Monterey Museum of Art and also to live here at La Mirada over in the guest house. We're so thrilled that AIA has chosen La Mirada as a place to do this really significant presentation about Mickey Meunnig. And I'm thrilled at all the people who've agreed to take part in it, many of whom are loyal devotees of his work and also of the art world. And I just want to thank you all for being here today and let you know that we ourselves are beginning to move down the path of reimagining our home on Pacific Street, and we'll be thinking a lot about architecture over the next few years. And we very much want this community of people who understand and benefit from architectural thinking to be part of our community as we think about it as well. So look forward to those conversations in the future. If you're particularly interested, let me know. And I hope that this afternoon is going to be amazing, and I'm just looking forward to it. So I'm going to introduce Eric Dyer.
Thank you, Corey. I wanted to thank you for coming to this special AIA Monterey Bay Arts and Architecture lecture presented with the Monterey Museum of Art. I want to first thank Corey Madden and Robin McKee of the Monterey Museum. Thank you so much for partnering with us. I hope this is the first of many of these events. And I especially want to thank our sponsors for today's event, which are Tim Allen Properties and Post Ranch Inn. AIA Monterey Bay for several years has been producing talks focusing on the architectural legacy of the Central Coast. In March, we had Kip Stewart, A Life in Painting, Design and Architecture. Kip was a good friend of Mickey's, founding designer of Summit Furniture and original designer of the Ventana Inn. And if you go to the AIA Monterey Bay website, aiamontereybay.org, or our YouTube channel, you can see that and many others on architects such as George Brockhofflow, Olive Dahlstrand, John Thodas, Will Shaw, and Henry Hill. These videos, so professionally filmed and edited by Mike Buffalo of House of 8 Media, thank you, Mike, and Kane Sound for the audio, are really becoming real historic documents of this legacy, and sometimes the only such documents on these great designers. So I'm so glad we made this day happen, because any focus on the architectural legacy of the Central Coast would be significantly incomplete without Mickey Meunnig. One can say, in many ways, his work is the architecture of Big Sur. And ever since I moved here in the early 1990s and discovering him, I've really been just captivated and inspired by his work. I really can't think of many other architects in the world who have so manifested the spirit of a place, its landscape, and its culture than the designs of Mickey Meunnig. And unfortunately for me, I did not get to know him well, but admired him from afar. But you are all in luck today, because we have many of the key people who really did know him best here to celebrate him. And we'll begin with a study of his life, body of work, and place in the history of the organic architecture movement with architect and historian Alan Hess. Alan will also then bring up one of the patriarchs of the organic architecture movement and good friend and colleague of Mickey's, the great Herb Green. And we'll then speak with architects who worked in Mickey's office, Daniel P. Hoda, along with Thomas Rittenventer. And we'll conclude with two of his great friends and clients, Mike Freed, managing partner of Pass Resorts and Post Ranch Inn, and the artist Greg Hawthorne of Hawthorne Gallery. So let me introduce Alan. He is author of 21 books on modern architecture and urbanism in the 20th century. His subjects include John Lautner, Oscar Niemeyer, Frank Lloyd Wright, as well as the Ranch House, Las Vegas, and Palm Springs. He is a commissioner on the California State Historic Resources Commission and serves on the boards of Preserve Orange County and Palm Springs Modernism Week. He has been the architecture critic of the San Jose Mercury News and National Arts Journalism Fellow at Columbia University. He has helped to conserve or landmark many buildings from the modern era and has received awards for this work, such as the Honor Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He wrote the introduction to Mickey's one monograph, Dreams and Realizations for a Living Architecture, and his latest book is The Palm Springs School, 1934 to 1975, which will be published by Rizzoli next February. So please help me welcome Alan Hess. Alan?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for being here. This is really heartwarming for me to see the interest in somebody like Mickey Meunnig and the architecture of this area. What I'm going to do today is to try to encapsulate his career, which is going to be real hard in 40 minutes. But what I would like to try to do today is to gel a lot of that down. Show you some of the span of Mickey's career, but then also place him in a larger context. I think this is what is really important. Mickey is one example of somebody who is kind of a local specialty. You obviously all know him. His name has been around here for decades, but he isn't as widely known. Neither is organic architecture, which he just so brilliantly interpreted in his work. And so I'm going to try to show you exactly where he fits into this larger story of modern architecture through the 20th century and why that is important, and especially why it is so important that this event is happening today. It's being recorded. We have clients and colleagues of Mickey that we need to get on the record for history, for their knowledge and the ideas, so that we understand exactly how important Mickey's work is, but also the contributions of this great Monterey, Big Sur, Carmel area. It has played a major role in terms of the development of modern architecture, especially in California, which was such a great generator of innovations throughout the 20th century. This is a souvenir from my day, I can't remember how many years ago, when Mickey took me on a tour of a number of his buildings around. This is at the Scharfenberger house. But I'm going to start back in the 19th century with two figures, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Louis Sullivan, because the concept of nature has been integral to the identity of America throughout its history as well. Coming to this, these shores has been, which is so different. And as the continent unfolded through American history, new discoveries were made about what? About nature and its resources and what it meant and what effect it had on the psyche of Americans as well. These are two of the greatest interpreters of that, because nature then naturally developed into a whole set of ideas, which we call organic architecture today. We're going to be talking about a number of these interpreters of what was the impact of nature on their work and on the public as well. What is organic architecture? There are a lot of different definitions. It might be a building that looks like a seashell, or it might be a building that is using natural materials in their raw state. I like to think of organic architecture as a concept, like the concept of a tree. A tree has many elements: a trunk, branches, leaves, flowers, roots. Each one of those looks very different, and yet they go together organically as a whole. And that, to me, is the best model for what organic architects are doing. They're taking disparate forms, functions, and bringing them together in a unity which is not at all simple. So we have the impact of nature. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson lived back east, and we have the deep forests of the Northeast as well. That was the nature he knew and thought was so extraordinary. But then Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright were out on the prairies, out in Chicago, a whole different style of nature, but it inspired them in certain ways. You go even further west, and of course you have the deserts of the great Southwest. And at the end of America, you have Big Sur, and a very distinctive type of nature. Organic architecture, by many different architects, inspired what really became modern architecture. The modern architecture did not start in Europe in 1919 with the Bauhaus. It started in America in the mid and late 19th century, and this is part of the fruits of that discovery. Mickey Meunnig, of course, being one. So, quickly, what is Mickey's work? Here's a couple of examples. The Cadell House as well on this dramatic site, and Mickey makes the most of this plunge of the cliff down into the Pacific Ocean. But also using modern materials and natural materials and natural light, he creates these spaces for living and communing. The sense of connection between indoors and outdoors comes through in so many of his houses in so many different ways. And of course, houses that are buried literally in the ground and are part of the earth and the cliffside. These are also parts of how Mickey interpreted what natural architecture, organic architecture, was to be about. You see it also in many of his drawings. This is a plan of the Silos House number 2 as well. And you see these natural forms, natural curves, borrowed often from nature, but inspired and put together with just a remarkable a complexity and ability, which is what makes his work so great. Brief background on his history, in case anybody doesn't know. He was born George K. Meunnig in Joplin, Missouri in 1935. When he was 12, he saw an article on the architect Bruce Goff in an architecture magazine, which he did not forget. He went on to study aeronautical engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology, but the architecture bug was already planted, and so he transferred to the University of Oklahoma to study with Bruce Goff in 1957. After school, he was employed by an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright, but then when he visited Esalen in 1971, it was all over. That's when he decided to stay and work in this area. And it was the natural setting and the possibilities and the community here which really affected him. Oh, let me go back for one moment. I want to talk just a bit about Bruce Goff. Down at the bottom here, you see him with Eric Mendelsohn in the lower left-hand corner. Let's see if I can get this to work. Eric Mendelsohn, the great European modern architecture. Next to that, to the right, is Bruce Goff with Frank Lloyd Wright. Next to that is Bruce Goff with Herb Green that we have with us here today. And finally, on the right, Bruce Goff with his good friend Lloyd Wright, the son of Frank Lloyd Wright, who was also a great architect. So Goff is a figure to be reckoned with. And incidentally, the Chicago Institute of Art is going to be doing a retrospective on Bruce Goff, I believe next year, which will bring organic architecture to the fore for a good part of the nation, which has often dismissed it. Dismissed it because of buildings like this. This is the Bavinger House in Oklahoma by Bruce Goff. It is a spiral, and inside there are no boxes. You have hanging rooms in this spiral space, a complete reconception of what a house can be. And that is, again, a core tenet of organic architecture. This is the building that Bruce Goff that Mickey Meunnig at age 12 saw and left an impression on him, and led him eventually to Bruce Goff's at the University of Oklahoma. What then did Mickey do with these ideas, this education he had with Goff and what he wanted to do in architecture? This is one of his first buildings, the Folk House in Joplin, Missouri, where he was born, from 1963. And extraordinarily, again, completely reconceiving the idea of what space and structure can be. There is a ridge line that runs along the top, which is flat, but off of this, I think I have a slide. On the right there, you can see these curves are all made up out of wood beams, very carefully designed and placed to create these spaces, the textures, the natural light, and this is just the beginning. He came out, as he said, in 1971 here to Big Sur, and in 1972 he built his own house out there, of course, this glass teepee. Again, extremely simple form, set in the landscape, for the landscape, to bring the landscape inside and the inside outside as well. And in the view of the interior as well, very small space, and yet it has everything. It has a fireplace, it has a kitchen, a bathroom, living spaces, sleeping spaces, held aloft on this sleeping platform overhead. Again, so thoroughly and imaginatively rethinking what architecture was all about, not being hampered by the past, by precedent, but looking to new materials, new engineering, new places like Big Sur to inspire what a habitation could be about. He goes on, the Silos House number 2 as well. From the top, it's buried in the ground and very low profile, but from the other side, it opens up. It spills down the hillside, mated to the landscape, and each level has its own outdoor area protected from the wind as well, but something which is growing, inspired literally by the place, by the climate, by the materials of this special place known as Big Sur. His own house, his second house as well, up on top of the ridge from 1980. Just an amazing building, of course. Many of you probably have been there. But bringing the indoors outdoors and the outdoors indoors. We'll see some photos of that. This is the plan of it. Again, no boxes, but that a box is not the place to start architecture. You start with the land, with the contours, with the geology, with the materials, with the climate, nature, and then you come up with the answer of what the proper house is at that point. The Hawthorne House as well, this was actually an addition to an existing house, but it still, again, relates to this very steep site, but adds going uphill with this bridge, with a spiral staircase over here on the right. There we go. This pointer is a little bulky. Well, you see the vertical element over on the right-hand side. There's a spiral staircase going up from the old original building up into the main new living space as well. And on the inside, you can see how the views out, the spiral staircase in the upper right center top of the show, of the photo, all go together. Unusual forms, unconventional forms, but suited, not for the sake of being different, but suited to the place and the problem that he was solving. Here again is the plan. I know we have a lot of architects here, so I threw in a number of plans. But again, they're in the book, and I urge you to study them more carefully there. The original building, the very bottom of the slide, the new living room, and going up the second floor to the left, and then the master bedroom in the upper right. Indoor-outdoor spaces throughout, combining out. Again, one of the wonderful things we can do here in California is live outdoors and live with nature in so many different ways. And part of the history of modern architecture in California is about how so many different architects, Richard Neutrer, John Lautner, Frank Lloyd Wright, Frank Gehry, used that and came up with different ways to bring the indoors outdoors, the outdoors indoors. And Mickey Meunnig has supplied many, many examples of how to do that. Post-Ranchian, of course, most probably Mickey's masterpiece as well for its size, its extent, and the concepts in it. On this site, of course, different types of housing related to what? To the natural setting, either to the ocean side, the cliff side, the forests, entirely different buildings for the forest areas. All of these things is where Mickey is thinking about nature, the nature of the specific site, and suiting the building to that. Here are the tree houses as well, which, you know, are almost indistinguishable from the forest when you're up there. They just blend with the natural forest. Then the coastal houses as well. These two-story units, which are placed on the edge of on the cliff, on the edge of the forest, and again mimic the forms so as to bring the individuality of the site into the buildings that he deals with. This is an extended plan for the post-Ranchian, again, which bears a lot more study in individual characteristics. Lower right-hand corner is the restaurant communal area, and then you can spot the different types of buildings, either on the forest or on the coastline, all blended in. And of course, I think Herb might be talking also later about how Mickey spent days camping on this site so that he really got to know the site and where the building should go. Now, this is, again, the exact opposite of the one-size-fits-all sense of modern architecture, the idea of an international style. You could design one building which could go anywhere internationally. This is the exact opposite of that concept of architecture. And it, again, coming back to the theme, relates to the natural setting of the site. The restaurant, the entryway, half buried in the earth, of course. And then you walk inside and suddenly you're out in the middle of space, looking out over the Pacific Ocean as well. Not only the view on the horizon, but overhead, with these different levels of roof lines as well, which bring in natural light, views, a sense of the spaciousness of the Pacific sky as you are dining. These are all just such wonderful, original, creative ideas, but also based on an idea, based upon very firm concepts. This is not self-conscious architecture. This is not an ego being expressed. I'm going to do something different just for the sake of being different. No, that is not what organic architecture is about, though it is often criticized exactly for that. One of the bedrooms, again, you see how views, natural light, are all brought into the building because of these forms, which the roof lines. Also known as, well, we'll get into this, the textures of the natural materials. The Cadell House, again, set right on the edge of a cliff, and how does he use that? By maximizing the views. The connection of the inhabitant to the ocean, to these views, which is, of course, so remarkable in the Big Sur area. But Mickey captured that. He lived with it so long. He understood what it was all about. The Pavey House, also a berm house buried in the ground for any number of reasons. Insulation, protection from the wind, to reduce the impact of the architecture on the site. Again, concern about nature and setting. And yet, when you get inside, it is so remarkably varied. He's using steel and concrete and glass and putting it all together into this structure, again, going back to the metaphor of the tree, different materials, different purposes, but they all come together as an organic unity in the final design in a very original way. The Scharfenberger House is it echoing the ridgeline behind it, or is it echoing the motion, the rhythm of the waves below it? There's no real answer to that. It's all of those things that come together from nature, from an architect who understood what this place was all about, and put those all together, redefine them in his architecture. And again, in so many ways. It isn't really possible to point to one style as what Mickey did. There's such variety to his forms, his shapes, his building types. But again, it's a disadvantage because in architectural histories, it's hard to label him. And if you can put a label on somebody, then it's much easier to say, oh, that's what he's all about. Mickey was so varied, as many organic architectures were, that the nature of organic architecture has been lost in general. Which, again, I come back is why it's so important that the AIA and the Monterey Art Museum is doing this today. Because you folks, among most people, will really understand the nature of these areas that this architect is grabbing onto and bringing to architectural form. And this is a message that needs to be more widely known. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. Again, remember that he did study aeronautic engineering before he went into architecture. So complexity and putting things together and getting the structure right. Again, these were not thrown together by wood butchers or something. These were all thought out. The drawings that are in the book as well, and there are a couple of on the table out here as well, show the great detail, precision, thought that went into each of these individual designs. Okay, step back a bit, the larger context. Why is Mickey Meunnig important outside of this particular region? Well, let's go back to the late 19th century. Louis Sullivan and inventing a new type of building, the skyscraper. This is one example, the Guarantee Building in Buffalo, New York, a center of industry, a center of the new century coming, of using new materials and how to express those. And the Guarantee Building is one example of that. And Sullivan, of course, is known for his ornament. His ornament derived from both nature and modern science and technology. Look at the precision, the angles, the detail in these drawings. But also you can clearly see how it's derived from nature, from leaves, from branches, from forms, from tendrils, and so forth. Why? Because America was about nature. America and its development was impacted by its development over the centuries as people encountered the West, the plains, the deserts, the coastlines, all of these different parts, and strove to live in them. And the architects strove to create architecture which would reflect that, be the habitations for Americans living on this continent. So, we have, in the broadest sense here, the history of modern architecture. We all know, of course, of the international style. And one of the best examples is the Edith Farnsworth House in Illinois by Mies van der Rohe, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, great German architect, one of the directors of the Bauhaus in the 1930s before he came to Chicago and taught at the Illinois Institute of Technology. But these buildings are about modern technology, engineering. They're steel, precision. They're not really meant to blend with nature. They are meant to contrast with nature. Very different from the thread, the stream of architecture going from Louis Sullivan to Frank Lloyd Wright and people like Bruce Goff, and then Goff's students like Mickey Meunnig and Herb Green and others. Both of these are legitimate ways to think about modern architecture. But for some reasons, and I have my opinions about why, the organic architecture has been given short shrift, not as important. It does seem somewhat to many self-indulgent. It isn't. But that's the first impression, that people not used to these forms, not used to these natural settings, might bestow upon what organic architecture is about. Some examples. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright, we do know the Walker House here in Carmel. Frank Lloyd Wright, the great architectural ego against the Pacific Ocean. And what does he do? The Walker House is the answer to that. But working and studying with Frank Lloyd Wright are the many, many architects, just going to mention a couple, to show you the spread and the importance of organic architecture. Rowan Maiden and Mark Mills, two great architects, again, working in this area. Both of them studied with Frank Lloyd Wright. Paulo Soleri in Arizona, John Lautner in Los Angeles, great architects. And you'll notice that these buildings are not imitating Frank Lloyd Wright. They are taking his concepts and taking them into new areas, solving new problems, giving them new form. This is part of what the organic architecture has contributed to modern architecture. And we have then Bruce Goff and his students as well, including Herb Green and the Prairie House down in Norman, Oklahoma. And we have Bart Prince, also working, based in Albuquerque, but working all across the United States. John Marsh Davis, also mostly working in Northern California. These were Bruce Goff students. Now, Goff never studied with Frank Lloyd Wright. He admired Frank Lloyd Wright very much, but he kind of maintained his own ideas, his own distance, which to me shows just how fertile the ideas of organic architecture are. They're not just imitating a Frank Lloyd Wright Prairie House, which are great pieces of architecture, but you don't need to imitate them. You can take those concepts and take them further. And then we get to a couple of ideas. Again, this has to be necessarily so brief, but I wanted to break down a couple of particular ways in which Mickey took these ideas, what he learned from Bruce Goff, combined them with what he learned here at Big Sur, and the forms that he came up with in order to express them in architecture. What did he do with nature? He dealt, from one point, with sustainability. How do you use climate, heat, the insulation properties of soil, for example, passively to create habitable spaces? How to use natural light? How should natural materials be used? And then how to use the actual topography of the site. The cliffs, the curves, the drop-offs, the general site in which the building is being constructed. For example, in this house, it has a giant tank of water, a wine vat in the center of the house, which provided water for a passive solar heating system in the house as well. That gave the house form. Or the Silos house, which was stepping down the hillside. But that uses natural ventilation of winds coming up to circulate through the house as well, thus giving it form, especially this corridor that connects the levels of the house, but also brings in a convective current of wind. Or natural materials, stone from this area, which can be so beautiful, and wood as well. How do you use those natural materials? All expressing nature. And at the Post Ranch Inn, of course, you have these houses buried in the ground, again, creating the insulating properties of soil. Also very important, of course, here is sense of community. Mickey didn't just design houses, which are very important, but social spaces also for the community. This is the Barclay Henry studio as well. Again, this was on the day Mickey gave me a tour of so many of his buildings, and there he is standing. Or the Hawthorne Gallery as well, an art space as well for the community. But such a wonderful unconventional set of forms for the purpose of the building, of bringing people in, of displaying art, but also the social aspects of gathering to look at and to do art. There's an interior of that up on the second floor as well, where you see how these great structural trusses, two of them, create really kind of a bridge over the ground floor and are integrated into the space of the building. Certainly, Esalen Baths is a social space, and this is one, of course, his experience at Esalen is what brought him out to Big Sur in the first place. And when the baths were destroyed in a storm, Mickey was asked to recreate or rebuild the baths in his way on the edge of the cliff. But Mickey was working through his later part of his career on even larger projects, many in China as well as this hotel and restaurant space. Just a remarkable concept of this large space. Never built, but he had it in his mind. He did design it as he wanted. Technology and engineering. We're talking about nature, but the thing about organic architecture is that it is not all just natural. It knew that it was working in the 20th century. It knew that engineering was advancing very quickly for new materials, new structural abilities as well. And the question for an organic architecture was how to blend nature and this new technology. He wasn't going to just express, the Bauhaus architects, Mies and so forth, often were all about expressing the machine, the straight lines, the severity, the functionality, all fine things. But the organic architects were seeing how to use technology as a tool to get closer to nature. So this one detail from Mickey's own house, where you see this steel truss over, which holds up the glass skylight, which moves as well, and the wood beam ends, and the glue laminated beams as well. So he's combining technology and natural materials. You see this at the Barclay Henry studio as well, where on the right you see a plan. That is a catenary curve. A catenary is just a piece of chain. You hold two ends. What's the form between those two ends? That's a catenary curve. And he uses that to create this extraordinary sloping ceiling as well. And there are, I think the next slide shows that there is, upper left-hand corner, there's actually a cable there, which he tacks into the wood roof, which is the cable that holds up the roof. So he's combining, again, engineering, modern engineering. Same thing with concrete block. He sees the ornamental character of it, or the skylight in the Pavey house as well. Or in the McDade house, taking these columns, which are angled like a trunk of a tree in the forest as well, and bringing outdoors, indoors in this sort of building. Space and form, different types of forms, not boxes, not conventional Platonic forms necessarily, but ones which are suited to the place and the purpose. You see this in, of course, the indoor-outdoor space of his own house as well, with the operable roof line, the skylight overhead, literally to bring the outside inside. And the Silos house with these curves over the grape arbor, but then the post-ranch inn tree houses, which are all about structure, these poles, post and beam structures holding these units aloft. And it is good to compare, for example, what Mickey was doing in 1966 for a mineral museum in Joplin with what Zaha Hadid, one of the great architects of recent decades, did for a concert hall in Azerbaijan as well. in 2012. So you can definitely see that Mickey, with his organic thinking, is ahead of the curve in thinking about these things. And so we are going to conclude right now. And as I was looking in through Mickey's book, I was rereading Herb Green's foreword to it and came upon this quote, which I think really sums up what Mickey was, why he was so special. I know of no other architect who packs more poetry into a column, combining metaphors of the raw nature of sloping tree trunks with bodily gestures of lifting, exaltation, and the importance of the human understanding of the visible world given by texture and touch. All of these things coming from nature. Mickey's response to the natural setting he discovered, fell in love with here in Big Sur. And then what did he do with it? That is really what his importance is. And again, just to stress, this is part of the larger history of modern architecture. It's one chapter which has not always been given the credit and due that it deserves. A lot of architects conventionally trained just don't understand it. And it is your duty as people who live here, who appreciate Mickey, understand the place and what he was about. I think to carry this message on to the broader world, which is why I'm so happy to be here with you today. So that's the end of my speech, and then we'll go on in just a moment. So let me take another drink of water. What we are going to do right now is see a short trailer for the movie that Herb Green's grandniece, Leila Cohen, who is here with us today, is now creating on not only Herb Green's work, but Mickey Meunig's and the sense of organic architecture. This is a work in progress. You do have some material, right, that is available at the top. They are looking for funding. It's it's a project well worth supporting to get this message out. But this is a short trailer about it. And then after that, I want to introduce, and I'll just give you a bit of an heads up on this, which is, excuse me, about Herb Green. I am going to have a short conversation with Herb Green. We'll be up here talking about his work. Herb Green now lives in Berkeley, but he was a student of Bruce Goff, and then he became a teacher at the University of Oklahoma under Bruce Goff. He also taught in Arkansas as well. Kentucky. From then, he had really a distinguished career, got a lot of attention, especially for his Prairie House. So we saw a brief slide of there, which was published in Life magazine in 1961 and made a sensation. This was so new, but the public responded to it in a very positive way. Herb's career then evolved. He has been working mostly as an artist, a painter over many years, but taking these concepts from architecture, many connections to that. But right now, let's go ahead and watch the trailer, and you'll get a better sense of Herb and what's going on with this film and its connection to Mickey.
To me, organic means we come from a past where you're tied to beginnings. Could be the earth, could be the atmosphere of the universe, and you compress or build up other aspects, forms into what you want to accomplish.
There is a complexity, there's a mystery about nature that brings about a very rich, dense, inclusive approach to philosophy and design. Herb Green has made a remarkable contribution to our understanding of this complexity.
If you get absorbed into Herb Green's world, which is not just architecture, it is art and it is philosophy, science, there's sociocultural phenomena, ecological phenomena. I mean, it just has many branches.
Today we may think of the Midwest as a fairly conservative thinking part of the country. But in fact, we look back in history, there are these very progressive ideas, especially about architecture.
I wanted to do a house on the prairie where no other houses were. I wasn't thinking of making a publicity or getting praise. I just did it.
This is a visionary design. It has so much going on. It's so rich. You might not even think that something like this could be built.
Oh my goodness. I smell all that cedar, like as if it was just put in yesterday.
Look at that, the stair going up to the roof. It's sort of surprising to see it again like this. Oh my God. Can I do this? Do you like it?
I love it. A lot of the materials are degrading, sort of been left on its own. It's glorious, and it's tragic to see it in this state.
Organic architecture and international style architecture from Europe had been in this kind of race for the public's affection, and both were succeeding to a great extent. Critics just did not know what to make of this stuff. But coming into the 60s and 70s, we find that the organic architecture is being less understood, more marginalized. By kind of marginalizing the work of the organic architects, they could then put it in its place. Unfortunately, they did put it in its place.
Uncle Herb's paintings are kind of the saving grace to not having continued architecture. But he didn't stop creating. I think if there hadn't been this other medium to work on, I don't know what kind of person we would be talking to. It'd be a very different story with a lot more tragedy.
Each person is an individual who has a lot of common thoughts, but everybody's really a different person. And I think that's the most important part of what I'd like to see elaborated on. It's the individuality of the person.
Today, in a number of ways, and certainly through this documentary on Herb Green, we are able to remember the future that we forgot. So now we're putting a couple of chairs up here for Herb and me to sit in. We're going to have a bit of a conversation.
Good to see you.
Again, you were a good friend of Mickey's for many years. You were first his teacher at the University of Oklahoma, but then you continued to be a friend of his. You had so much in common.
I was very fond of Mickey, and he was surely 5'6". But his work, the breadth of it, the scope of it, the variations of it, his engineering training made him the most creative architectural genius I have ever known. And I'm including Frank Lloyd Wright.
And you did know Frank Lloyd Wright also.
I didn't know him. I'd met him a couple of times, but I didn't know him. But I studied his work carefully.
But Mickey's work...
The whole of Mickey's work is really beyond my brain, beyond my imagination. The scope of it is just unbelievable. His own house, I did done the Prairie House, got out of publicity, but Mickey's own house was so wonderful. It was endless. You just couldn't stop looking at it. So, Mickey had more genius than, in my opinion, than even Frank Lloyd Wright.
Well, how do you see organic architecture and working with nature? What is important about that to you?
Well, you relate to the site. You work with the client's existential propensity. For instance, Goff did a famous house called the Ford House. and he had Quonset ribs as a structure. And Mrs. Ford's favorite color was scarlet red. So Goff had all the Quonset ribs painted scarlet red. And that's an example of Goff's tenderness and understanding.
So it's important to relate the house to the individual client.
Yeah, and the site, and the materials you use, and the philosophy that you have.
We have a couple of photos right behind you. You can't see them, but some of the images from my talk, which talk about the Bavinger house, the Folk house, Mickey's first house.
I thought that was a very great masterpiece. It's one ridge, come out to curving windows, and then the rafters were 2x6s, but they were right together bound. So they made such a marvelous pattern as they come down and then went around the windows. That is the most, I could have never thought about it to be 1,000,000 years old. Now, Mickey had more genius than any architect I've ever known.
So doing something like the Folk house is not an easy thing to design?
No, I think that Mickey had this training in structure that helped him.
Yeah. Your own house, the Prairie House, the site of that had a ravine and other natural elements?
Well, it was bare prairie with just grass and a ravine nearby, and there was no other buildings around it for a mile. The Bavinger house was a mile away, but it was in a wooded sort of a canyon, forested. And that was done before I did the Prairie House. But when I did the Prairie House, it wasn't quite finished, but a famous photographer named Julius Schumann was taking pictures of the Bavinger house, and somebody told him to come over and see my house, and he saw it, took pictures of it. The next week, they were published in Life magazine.
But you didn't expect that.
Oh, no. When I did it, I had no idea it would be published. It was not the slightest.
But it had an impact. Why do you think it had such an impact so widely?
Well, I wanted to look like many, this is the influence of Alfred, I wanted to have it look like as many of the aspects of a house that I could in one building. So I wanted to look like it was a home on the prairie, like it could be a barn or an animal. And then I had this window facing due west where the tornadoes came straight from. And that gave that window and the structures that had coming off of it gave this house a sense of poignancy, and tenderness, wonder. And I think that's what caught. I didn't think it was going to cause a ruckus at all, but it seemed to catch on with other people.
You were just building it as your own family house.
Yeah.
And it turned out that way. Well, you told me that the prairie site has changed for that house today.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, it does. They planted trees near the house, and the street that the house was off of is now filled with a row of houses. So the prairie's gone, and they're restoring it, but trying to raising money, but I'm not interested in it because it's not the prairie anymore.
It's not the prairie anymore. Not the prairie you originally saw
Right.
and responded to.
Right.
So do you know what you would do if you were to rebuild that today?
No. I don't know.
But it would be different because the nature is different. The site is different.
Yeah, and your mind is different. That's what Goff said. You should never repeat yourself. In the Bauhaus under Gropius, you did one form and you repeated it, one ideal form.
Yeah.
And you had geniuses like Mies van der Rohe is one house, but he believed that too, one form for all houses. And that Goff absolutely tore that theory apart brilliantly.
Well, Bruce Goff was Mickey's teacher and your teacher originally. How did he teach? How did he convey these ideas to you students?
I remember my first meeting with Goff. He talked softly, didn't use long words, but there was an expression in his eyes. And after he talked for me about 20 minutes, I came out and said, "I met my first genius." Goff had an understanding. He'd done 3 masterpieces, in my opinion. He did 150 houses, but only the 3 of them that I saw that I thought were masterpieces was what was the name?
The Bavinger House?
The Bavinger House was a beautiful house, but I didn't include that. Well, for example, Bavinger was an artist, and Goff's interior composition didn't allow much space for an artist. So Bavinger had to build kind of a warehouse out back and where he did his work. And but Goff did the Ford House, which is, I never saw it, but my great niece Leela did, and I was so impressed by his use of the color scarlet red because that was his client's favorite color.
So he was designing the house individually for that specific
Yeah.
client.
And that's what I learned from Goff.
Okay.
I worked for Goff for about 10 years doing rendering, so I didn't charge him anything about after I graduated.
Well, I know that Goff brought both music and art into his teaching, and I know that you have been working for a long time now yourself as an artist.
Yeah.
What is the connection between architecture and art as you practice it?
Oh, that's a tough question for me at the moment. But when I did art, I started art pretty young. Goff did compositions on about 28 by 40-inch boards. Every Sunday he did one. And a friend of mine, Toby Bowlby, thought he was in that cellar every Sunday morning with no ventilation, sniffing glue. And at Goff, don't tell. Okay. Anyway, that's the end of that.
Well, you mentioned also earlier that you were impressed by Mickey's living on the site of the Post Ranch Inn.
Oh, very much. He built this little cabin, and I think he lived in it for 15 years, and gradually got to know the community, began to do architecture for the individual sites and families and such.
Yeah.
And of course, we did the Post Ranch Inn. He slept out, I think, over 20 nights, all night long, contemplating where he would site the different cabins. And that, I would have never done that if however long I lived. But that shows Mickey's sensitivity. And as I said before, I say again, with his engineering skill and his talent for architecture, he had more genius than anybody I've ever known, including Frank Lloyd Wright and Bruce Goff.
Well, that is high praise. Well, Herb, it is an honor for us to have you today here and to speak to us as well. But thank you very much for making the way down from Berkeley to be here especially.
I want to introduce you to 2 people that worked for Mickey at different critical times. And I first want to thank Alan for your wonderful lecture, and Herb for coming and all your insights into Mickey. Thank you. The 2 people we have before us now are, one is architect Daniel Pijota, Pijota Architecture based in San Francisco. Daniel and his firm have been widely published nationally and internationally with projects ranging from the beautifully crafted coffee shops and restaurants to the new Silver Oak Winery in Napa. His work also includes some really truly spectacular residences, many of which are built in Monterey County and definitely including Big Sur. Daniel received his Bachelor of Architecture in 1985 and ended up, after graduation, as actually a carpenter on the Price House in Newport Beach, one of the great homes designed by organic architect, which was just mentioned, Bart Prince. He then went on to apprentice with Mickey from 1987 through 1991, in the critical times during which he was working on Post Ranch Inn, and as a consultant with him through 1995. Thank you for coming, Daniel. And
Thank you.
Thomas Rintenvender is founding principal of Ecologic Architects based in Carmel, which has a focus on sustainability and research, as well as a more regular practice. He was born in Europe and raised there. He studied at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna and SCI-Arc in Los Angeles under another person mentioned, Zaha Hadid, Greg Lynn, and Wolf Pri of Coop Himmelblau. Eventually made his way to Big Sur and worked for Mickey from 2003 through 2006, a little later in Mickey's career. And Thomas is also an educator and a teacher at UC Santa Cruz since 2009. So welcome to you both. I want to start with Daniel, and I think we told some of the story, but I'm curious about this love of organic architecture at this early stage of your career. I guess beginning in school, where you had a former teacher who
I did.
sitting here.
Well, he was one, but I had a teacher named John Lang, who I think introduced me to the first time to the work of Antonio Gaudí, Bruce Goff. It was a sort of mind-blowing coming into architecture school in my early 20s. Became fascinated with it, started trying to do what I could to do what they were doing. Came out of school, wanted to continue doing that. There weren't a lot of organic architects out there. Interviewed with some people. Mark Mills was one I interviewed with, John Lautner. Can't remember some of the other ones, but ultimately took a more conventional architecture job, left after 6 months, went to work instead as a carpenter on the house. I felt like that would get me kind of what I was looking at, at least a touch of it. And then a long story, but that's how I got to Mickey, through that house. A contractor was building a house in San Luis Obispo, came to visit. I wanted to connect with that contractor to possibly be carpenter on that house for Mickey, but when I called Mickey, because I didn't know the contractor's name, he said, well, you might want to just give me, you might want to come up and take a visit, because I've got this new project. That project was the Post Ranch. I think he had just gotten it like the week before, something like that. So.
And I'm actually curious, like back in school, what was it about organic architecture that suddenly captured your imagination, as opposed to all the other modernism that was going on, or even postmodernism back then?
The individuality of it, the different, being so idiosyncratic and being different, the shapes. I mean, I grew up building things, but I grew up in a suburb in New Jersey, and it was different, I think, probably what drew me to it.
And then going back to Mickey's office, and you're moving up there, and we'll get to what his office was later with Thomas, but I'm curious, what was it like back then, working for Mickey Meunnig? And
I don't know if the house...
What was the office environment?
The first day, the first interview was at the teepee house.
Yeah.
He gave me a tour of Big Sur, and then the first day was at the teepee house, but his glass teepee house, but we got forced out of there because the flies were so bad. It wasn't really a place you could work. And I lived in a school bus about 100 yards from there. His daughter owned a school bus, and I lived in that school bus for 4 years. So that was like, I got what I was looking for. It was different, right?
Yeah.
I was coming from living in Newport Beach on the beach to living, working with Mickey. And I got to work on several of his more important projects: the Scharfenberger residence, the Post Ranch Inn, what was the other one? Well, it was mostly the Post Ranch Inn, the more I think about it.
And so what was his, I guess that's an interesting thing about the Post Ranch, is maybe you really saw that design process of how that started, or?
It was kind of already fully baked when, the story I understand is he gave Mike a sketch of one of the tree houses, I believe, is how he got the job, and that was already had happened. What I think, I was just thinking about this on my way down here, I think what I actually got to witness, I didn't get to see the germination of the idea as much as the development of the idea, and I got to be part of the development of the idea. So I was getting to design fireplaces and stairs, and he gave me a lot of autonomy to design things, with his blessing, obviously. But the the underground houses look like they did in that first sketch. We didn't develop them all that much, right? I mean, we developed them a lot, but
following through
they didn't
on the
change
original
that. The tree houses looked very similar. The ones that developed later were the bigger structure that's six or 8 units, and then the round houses. I guess I did see the restaurant develop a little bit too, but Mickey was always in my memory, it was always starting with a plan and a sketch.
And a sketch.
Yeah.
And then
There were no computers yet, so this was all
and the site visit.
all the
I
more
guess.
impressive, really, for what he could achieve.
And spending time on the site.
Spending time in the site, Post Ranch particularly, I got to witness that firsthand. Got the worst case of poison oak I've ever got in my life. The brush was this high, and there was no leaves on it, so what could go wrong, right? You could still get poison oak with no leaves on it, and so we were out in these areas, like literally, like he'd be there with his little sight. He'd be moving me over to the left and to the right and forward and backwards, and we sighted every one of the buildings, but by hand that way. So I think that's one of the genius things about it, in addition to it being so sensitive to each one of the little microclimates on the site. You know, these being exposed to the ocean, being more buried in the hill, the ones in the oaks being up in the trees, which also had its functional benefits because it was posts for the structure, didn't disturb the roots as much in the oak trees, put them up in the trees. So he's like, I would say that's kind of an example of what I learned from Mickey, was that it wasn't really just about form. It was a lot of things coming together, like Herb said. It was structure, it was how it responded to a client's needs. The site was first and foremost. I came to think of his work later, not so much these buildings, but some of his latest work as more like vessels to experience the landscape as opposed to being objects in and of themselves. And that's kind of where I took my work going forward, thinking of it that way. I think John Lautner might have talked about it that way too, but the land was really, like, I always saw Mickey's work as doing just enough to do what he needed to do to create a connection to the land and create a beautiful space.
Structure. And Thomas, as time progressed, did you see any changes to his design process, or is it the way of working and in terms of later work as?
Yes, no,
compared to what
I
Daniel was
think, I joined Mickey's office in 2003, and it was he was in his late 60s. It was kind of later in his career. But I think he definitely just stayed true to sort of cultivating a vision in his mind. And then, with really careful study of the site and the landscape, and really looking to inspiration from the surroundings, from the trees, from the site and the views, certainly. And yeah, sometimes you would ask him a question, there'd be a detail, or we'd be on a construction site, and we were trying to figure out how these two planes would come together, or, a fairly complex question, and he would kind of just close his eyes and
I forgot about that.
look back, and you weren't sure if he was asleep or if he was in a trance, but no, he was definitely sort of trying to move around and visualize these, these complex three-dimensional, planes coming together to make it work. And then, when I was working with him, sometimes he would produce a sketch or a drawing, and it was relatively abstract and really hard to understand. And we would have to kind of go through almost like a Gestalt process, to tease out, the actual structures in these drawings, and found that building like physical working models, that was a really helpful way to sort of translate this two-dimensional drawing into a physical form.
Did you have, you had computers at that point, right?
Yes, we did. Although Mickey was not really so excited about using three-dimensional modeling tools, and I think the three-dimensional modeling, the process, you lose a lot of that, the spontaneity and the kind of the craft. So we did a lot of work by hand, and then later on, once the project was developed, that we would bring it to a computer CAD drawing or 3D model.
Interesting. So I guess this is a question for both of you, just to take and go with, is what do you see as really the importance of Mickey work? How does it stand out for you? How do you, as looking back on it now, after some bit of time?
Personally or globally?
Both, yeah. Or just...
well, I don't think enough people know his work, first of all, so
yeah.
I'm glad we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I would say globally, it's what Herb talked about is sort of like the expression of the individual idea and connection to nature. I mean, the connection to nature is that we just still don't see it that much, actually. A lot of the form, like you were showing Zaha Hadid's forms, that wasn't really connecting to nature. That was really kind of created in a computer, and just because it was a cool forming, because you could. Whereas Mickey's was really connected to the land, and I think that's his importance globally, and it's also equally important to me too. That's really what because as a student, I was more along the lines of like, well, let's create crazy forms, because that's what organic architecture is, right?
So it started there, but then you...
But with Mickey, it was like learning how to edit back, get to the essence of what needed to be there, and most relate to the land.
Thomas, do you have thoughts on that too? Or...
Yes, well, yeah, I also think it's great that that you're hosting this event. I feel like because of the physical nature of Mickey's work, a lot of it was drawn by hand in pencil. It had a very short lifespan, and I'm not sure if and I want to emphasize that the projects we see here completed are just a very small percentage of the projects that you, as an architect, you have to be generating. You only get maybe two or three out of 10 projects actually built. So there's a huge archive of Mickey's work in a paper form that may or may not still exist today. But having events like this to document the work and share it with the public, I think, is extremely important. And I think Mickey's just his humble nature. He was just such a humble, very introverted artist. Not what you would think of as an architect with a world-class reputation. But just his humility and his willingness to kind of listen and respond to the landscape is something that he really exemplified.
One of the things I really wanted to get to, because I think it's important, and it's part of the kind of the building community here, is how important you see craft and the builders that produce the work were in part of the process, and how Mickey worked with them. And
it was hugely important. On the post-trans, there were daily visits on the site because our office was on the site, and so we were making real-time decisions with carpenters, with people doing concrete. I know he met a guy named Dan Woods, who's this master. He was a hot rod aficionado and kind of a creative genius in his own right. Many things that Mickey, it helped him realize some of the decisions. I think it even opened up his mind of what steel could do when he worked with Dan. Oftentimes we would have an idea, but we would let the fabricators run with it. Not necessarily run with it, but use their knowledge on how to use the material to develop it. And Big Sur, it was fertile ground for craftsmen. There's concrete. Butch Cron was a really skilled concrete guy, and that's another guy named Travis Krapkis who's still here. Yeah. The metal guy who I mentioned, all kinds of carpenters.
Richard Hartman, the glass guy, did a lot.
The glass guy, that was actually something that Mickey was really, glasses,
How did he think
a
about
centerpiece
glass?
of that.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Glass is such an important part of modern architecture, and he used it in this interesting ways.
I don't know how he thought about it. I think he thought of it as a non-thing,
That's interesting.
like as not something to emphasize, but to use in order to be able to see through it.
Just having the structure and the
Having
landscape,
as lit
and then
structure, glass, landscape. That's it.
that simple version of it. And I guess we should give a shout out also to one of the contractors of Post Ranch Inn who passed away last year, Bill McLeod. I know
Bill
Karen
McLeod.
is here. He
Very
was so instrumental in making these things happen.
And worked on some of the projects I
And
worked on too.
And there's many others. Thomas, do you have any thoughts on the people that work with Mickey to make these amazing things come to life?
Yes, certainly. I mean, going back to the concept of taking a two-dimensional sketch and then trying to tease a form out of it, and then actually to make it buildable, and to see it constructed. A lot of the detailing was worked out in the field by the contractors, by the teams actually building the house. So consequently, projects took a long time. It's organic architecture. You had to make sure your client had an organic budget too, because they kept on growing and growing and growing. It was an organic process, and that's I think where a lot of the beauty and the collaboration came in. Just the team would bring in sort of new ideas and help solve the details. That were so complex.
I mean, by today's standards, the drawings were, a set of drawings was this big instead of this big.
Yeah.
That's
changed for sure.
It's way different because the computer, you can achieve so much more, but I think we lost something too with that. Mm-hmm. I think he built into his architecture an ability to change in real time. The way he did the buildings. That using post structures with roofs on them gave him some flexibility to kind of move walls around if he needed to, or the form wasn't finished really.
Really, it's just all the way through the construction
All the way
process.
through, yeah.
And finally, before we bring up Mike and Greg, I wanted to ask both of you how you see working with Mickey has influenced you and impacted how you do architecture.
Sure, yeah. So, there's this one photograph that I took of Gibbs Smith, the publisher, and Herb Green. You were visiting Big Sur as well, this is in front of Mickey's house. This must have been in 2004, 2005, and so this was my first job out of university. And I just discovered this photograph in my archive there last night, going through all the documents I have from 20 years ago. But even today I pinch myself, that this is, that I was able to take part in this. And working in a small office and watching him over the 3 years, being his apprentice, I really kind of got a feeling for what it takes to manage an office, and all the design is a big part of it, but there's also many other parts to it. So it was pivotal in my career because I ended up staying here, and because of my work with Mickey, and he gave me a lot of courage to innovate and to not be fearful.
Simply, my career wouldn't have happened without Mickey, I would say. That was not a path that you set out to do when you start, right? Like to live in a school bus in Big Sur. But my career happened organically because of that fortuitous meeting with Mickey.
And the work itself?
I knew Mickey's work, but there were so many people in the organic world they didn't need anybody to help them. It was just them, usually, sometimes. And so it was really fortuitous to be able to be there at that time. And then my work continues in this area because of that. I mean, I still have, the bulk of my work is here.
And how do you see the design influence passing on, or the ideas of form and space and light and structure?
I mean, I think I've talked about all those things already, just how he put together the detailing in just enough way. The detailing, I think, was probably the biggest influence. Some of the way he made forms, how he related to the landscape. It's harder for me to do this now, running a bigger office than what Mickey and I had, but I sort of miss the days where the design was less developed and happened more in the field.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. You guys can stay up here, and I'm going to bring up a couple more chairs for our next guests, Mike Freed and Greg Hawthorne. So, Mike is co-founder and managing director of Passport Resorts LLC, which developed and runs Post Ranch Inn. He led the development from design entitlement process through construction and hotel opening. He's also managed the acquisition and renovation of other properties, such as the Jean-Michel Cousteau Fiji Island Resort, the Lodge at Skylonda in Montana, as well as Passport's Cavallo Point Lodge in the Golden Gate in San Francisco. Thank you for being here, Mike.
Thank you, Eric.
And of course, friend and client of Mickey. Greg Hawthorne is an artist of painting and sculpture, an entrepreneur, gallery owner, and certainly a patron of architecture. I think you could be counted as that. He developed, owns, and runs the Mickey Meunnig Design Gallery in Big Sur, and has a gallery in Port Orford, Oregon. And in his spare time, he sits on the San City Council. He grew up outside of Detroit, studied art at Wayne State. He and his wife, Susan, eventually made it to Big Sur, buying a home there, I think, in 1982, if I did my math right, and met Mickey in 1983. So thank you both for being here and as clients. So I think people would be really interesting, Mike, starting off with you, how this eccentric, mostly residential architect somehow came to design one of the premier resorts in the world. How did you come to realize that this was the right choice?
Okay, so I'm at Tassajara, which you all know, and while I'm there, I came up with this idea of a treehouse. But at Tassajara, you can't make any phone calls because they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have any connection anyway. So I get back to Big Sur, and I make a couple of phone calls and to another group of architects that I had, and I said, "Design me a treehouse." And they designed me a treehouse, and it didn't quite work. And so they got another architect together, and they designed me another treehouse, and that didn't work as well. And so this character over here comes over to me and says, "Freed, you got to go talk to Mickey Meunnig." So I said, "Okay."
No, you didn't. You said he's crazy.
No, that's not true. I said, "You're crazy."
He said, that guy's a nut. And I said, "You need a nut to design it." Go ahead.
So, I called Mickey, and I said, he said, "Why don't you come on?" I hadn't met Mickey at the time, and he called me up, and I called him up, and he said, "Come on over to Partington Ridge, and let's talk," to the same building that you went to. And I get up to Partington Ridge, and I look around, and all I see is the teepee. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm in the wrong place. Any event, I get into, and you know how there's like, I don't remember a lot what happened maybe 3 weeks ago, but this is in July of '84. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I knock on the door, and out walks Mickey, and for those of you who know Mickey at that time, and I'm 72 now, I'm in my 30s, and Mickey's hair's like this, and my hair's like this, and I say, "I'm looking for Mickey Meunnig." And he says, "I'm Mickey, come on in." And I walk into the teepee, and there is no plumbing, indoor plumbing. The toilet's outside, the shower's outside. Literally, Mickey did not have a pot to piss in, okay? And it's hot. And I said, "Mickey, it's hot in here." And he goes, "No problem." And he goes outside, and he turns the sprinklers on. And the spring brings the air in, and I cool off. And I'm thinking to myself,
passive technique.
Yeah, I'm thinking about hiring this guy. And I said, "Mickey, here's the deal. I'll give you a couple of $1,000, design me a treehouse. And if I like the treehouse, I'm going to hire you." 2 weeks later, he shows up and he designs the treehouse, very much like the drawing you'll see out there. And I asked the other architects to leave. I brought Mickey in, and I said, Mickey, here's the deal. I will pay you X amount of dollars per month, and you only work for Post Ranch. And Mickey said, you're going to pay me that? He said, yep, you just come down and you work at Post Ranch. I set up an office in Billy Post's house for Mickey. We rented the house, and for 2 years, Mickey did nothing but Post Ranch. And what Alan said is he slept in the location where every unit was. With Mickey, you couldn't get him to sign an agreement, so I hired him a woman named Lynn Harlow. Lynn got together, who worked for Bill McLeod, and Bill and Mickey and Lynn would bother me every month to make sure I got Mickey his check. And for 2 years, Mickey did nothing but the ranch. And so that's how I met him. And for me, to be up here, with somebody to get to honor somebody who changed your life, Mickey Meunnig changed my life. Mickey Meunnig and Bill McLeod changed my life because I had the two of them together, and it was this partnership between the three of us. And I literally I was a lawyer in San Francisco. I'd come down every weekend, and every day, Bill and Mickey and I would talk, and that's kind of how it got started and became a love affair between the three of us. And I cannot tell you how much Mickey, and be able to spend 40 years of my life getting to know a man, and you said it, and Herb said it, truly was a genius. And the key, quite frankly, the key was let Mickey let his genius evolve. And that's how it happened.
You slowly came to that realization that this is the process that you need to give him to create what you...
Well, yeah, and I didn't know shit about architecture, so for me it was very easy to let somebody like a guy like Mickey take control. And it was interesting too, and I don't know if any of the organic architects were here, but I got a call maybe a month after we opened from a group of organic architects. And they came to Post Ranch and spent, half a day, not just looking at the rooms, but climbing on the roofs and going over it. And this one architect came over to me and said, he goes, Mike, I want to thank you. And I'm saying, well, no, I wanted you guys here. And he said, no, I want to thank you for letting Mickey have the freedom to do what he did, because we see in what happened the freedom that you gave the architect. And never forget, another day I'll never forget.
And maybe let's talk about that result. I mean, the way he cited things, the way he created those buildings in such unique ways, respecting the microclimates, kind of really building something of the place. How did that, you think, reflect the success of Post Ranch?
Post Ranch is about Mickey and about Bill. There's no question in my mind that 5 months out, I had the one thing Mickey and I had in common, neither one of us had ever done a hotel before. And so we opened the hotel, and 5 months after we opened the hotel, we got the cover of Travel and Leisure. And from there, our occupancy literally went from 65% to 90%. And it was interesting because I got to talk to the assistant editor of Travel and Leisure, and it was in New York. And I asked him, and he said, we just had this guy, and his name was Tim Streetporter, was the photographer, and they just said, hey, we hear there's going to be a hotel in Big Sur, go look at it. So he did, and he called up, I can't remember the editor or assistant editor's name, and he said, this is not something that is deserving of a mention. This is deserving of an article. Well, for a hotel to get the cover at the time, to get the cover of Travel and Leisure was like, countries got the cover of Travel and Leisure. They didn't give hotels the cover, and it's because of Mickey. And I think Post Ranch is the only hotel, and then we got, I think it was called the Architectural Record, or he got, and I wanted to bring it. He got the cover of the Architectural Record. And it's just so interesting because the ranch has gotten 2 covers of Travel and Leisure, which is unheard of. And of course, it's Mickey. I mean, it's simply Mickey. We've done a lot with the art of design, how important it is. But for Mickey, it is Post Ranch.
And can you just mention, because I think this is quite impressive when you see it, and it's obviously a very expensive resort, how Bill, you, the threesome of you, how did you guys bring that thing in a budget? And that blew me away when you said that. It was,
Well, we weren't on budget. We were $3,500 over budget.
$3,500 over.
And
That's less than a night there, right?
And we weren't on. We were scheduled. I scheduled to open on April 1, 1992. I figured if it didn't open, I could always say April Fools. And we opened on April 9th, 1992. And that is when, and you know, I mean, for the architects here to have anything with Mickey done on time and literally on budget is a tribute to Bill McLeod. I mean, Bill and I spent some time traveling together, and what he did, Bill lived, I rented Billy Poe's house. So Bill lived at Bill's house. We had an office there, and the 3 of us would get together, but Bill, and I'd get a call from Bill, kind of funny story, I get a call from Bill all the time saying, okay, I have some issues with Mickey, so let's work it out. And I'd call Mickey and I'd say, you know, you guys work it out, and they always did. And one time, it's kind of a funny story, I get a call from Bill who says, the floor is in one of the tree houses, the first tree house, that unit's called Veranda. And Mickey says the floor is too low, a foot too low. And I said, okay, well, let's keep going. And Bill said, no, Mickey says we have to take the floor out. He's screwed up. And I said, yeah, I know, but the floor is in. And Bill said, I know, but we're going to keep moving. And I said, let me talk to Mickey. So I put Mickey on the phone, or Bill put Mickey on the phone. And I said, Mickey, the floor's too low, right? He says, yeah, the floor's too low. We got to raise it. I said, are you willing to pay for it? And he said, yeah, I'm willing to pay for it. And I said, okay, Mickey, you don't have to pay for it. And it meant that much to him. And they took the floor off and they rebuilt it. And that's the $3,500 we were over budget.
That's amazing. Yeah. Amazing story. Greg, I want to get you in here. I guess I'm going to just start with, because you met him in 1983. What drew you to him? So you actually had a home and a gallery designed by him.
Well, I was not drawn to him. He came to me. And it was in 1983, he walks up my driveway. And Susan came back later and said, who the hell was that? And I said, that's Mickey Meunnig, the famous architect. And because we were just new into Big Sur in 1982, and he already had a name for himself around town. And I was the upstart kid artist that just came into town, and nobody knew who I was. So it was great. But Mickey looked more like he came off Hogwarts Academy than he did as an architect. I mean, his hair is all disheveled. He comes in and he says, well, I'd like to I hear you're going to build a studio. And I said, yeah, that's what we're doing right now, actually. And he said, well, I'd like to design it. I said, well, Mickey, you're probably a little expensive for me at this juncture, and this is a simple building. This is not complicated like your building. So let's do the next building. I'm going to build I know I want to do a house, and I want to do a gallery in the future, so I'll talk to you about those. And he says, okay, well, keep me in mind and stuff, and I said, it was really nice to meet you. And then he left, and I went, well, that guy's kind of cool. And then when he came around to my house, I called him up and I said, I want to do an addition on my house. Greg, I don't do additions on houses. I said, well, how about this? And this is where this guy's idea came through. Because we were having drinks at my house, And then I said, well, I got to put an addition on this place. And I said, I can't figure out how I'm going to do this. I'm trying to where I'm going to go. And he says, well, just bridge it over the driveway. Mike Freed. I look at him and, I mean, this guy's not really the original thinker on design by a long shot. But anyway, I said, that's brilliant. That's what we'll do. So when I called Mickey, I said, Mickey, this is not just an addition, man. We're going to bridge over the driveway and make it a really cool spot. Okay, all right, I'll come over. So he came over, and we would get together on his designs. And my father's an architect, my uncle's an architect, and 4 of my cousins are architects. So I mean, we had a little bit knowledge on reading plans and everything else, so I didn't have the same problem. And so I'd go, Mickey, I think we should do this and stuff. He says, oh, no, I think this is kind of important and stuff. Then I'd give him another martini, and then he'd agree with me by the time we were done. And like in our house, we have a separation, which you saw in the drawings, is a separation between the master bedroom and the rest of the house. He said, well, you're going to have to walk outside. I said, but I don't want to sit in the dining room and look up and see buildings, so let's separate it. He said, that is a great idea. So we would get together, and we would go back and forth on different things. And the same thing we did with the gallery. He came in, and he brought me the designs at first, and it had the top, which I really liked, on the top of the gallery, which you can see there, which is curved. But then on the lower part, it looked like, a cheese thing, round. And, and it had one mouse hole to get inside. And I said, Mickey, we can't do this. This is a gallery. They got to be able to look into the building. I said, I want it to be like a prow of a ship on the front, with glass going up two stories. That way they can look into the building, and it draws the people off the Highway 1. And he goes, well, okay, well, let's think about that a little bit. And then he came back, and he did the drawings the way that I wanted. And I said, isn't that nice as a contrast to the curve with the straight lines? And he goes, yeah, actually, that worked out pretty good. And later on, they asked him, well, is this all your ideas? Oh, yeah, it was totally my ideas. Thanks, I appreciate it. And it was interesting, too, on the Post Ranch. I was the one that recommended to Mike to get Mickey and all that stuff, which worked out great, and it was great for Mickey. Then when the Post Ranch is done, I talked to Mike, and he says, well, we've got to figure out what kind of artwork. And I said, hey, Mickey, what would you like to see in there? Well, the Post Ranch doesn't need any artwork. I said, what do you mean it doesn't need any artwork? He says, no, my rooms are the artwork in themselves. I said, well, shit. So then I asked him, I said, well, is there any kind of artwork that you could see on the Post Ranch? Oh, yeah, well, rusty metal things, designs and sculptures. So guess who became a rusty metal sculpture designer? I'm not going to take no for an answer, man. So anyway, that's how it got me into sculpture. Actually, it was the Post Ranch. I hadn't really done too much sculpture before that, but in 1991, when we were going, I said, I'll design whatever you need. And so I designed figures to go in that were made out of steel, and then I did wall pieces.
Bar stools?
Bar stools. They came to me and they said, we need a bar stool. And I said, sure, I can do that. Never done a bar stool in my life, but I can do a bar stool. So we designed the bar stool, and then everybody came in, and the State of the Post Ranch said, can you do chairs? Can you do table? I mean, I just got a whole line of business going because of those bar stools. So it was, sometimes you get pushed out of areas where you're not so comfortable, and I think that's part of life, and that's the way it should be. That's organic architecture, that's organic artwork,
So I guess you could say about the relationship of client and architect, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of communication, and he actually took your ideas and went with them too. So.
Well, Mickey is not an easy guy to change his mind. It's kind of like the ship going down, and then to get him to change, it's kind of like you got to kind of ease into it. But a couple of things, like when you walk up my stairs in the gallery, the ocean was right there. You looked out, and he added a wall. And I said, Mickey, we got to change this, man. He said, no, this is going to be from southern exposure. You're going to get too much heat. I said, I'll put a film on it. I don't care, but I'm going to. You walk up the stairs, and there's the ocean that just hits you in your face. I said, we got to change that.
No. Let's tell the real story about how they changed that, Greg, okay? I walk up there and I'm looking at that, and I'm going, Greg, You can't see shit over here.
Well, because the wall wasn't in yet, but I said, well, is this going to be all glass? And I said, no, Mickey called for it to be a wall. And I said, what do you think? And he says, that's nuts. And I said, great, that's what I thought too. I mean, it was a reinforcement, but we already had figured out there's no way we're going to put a wall there. But anyway, that cost me $10,000. But that was the only change that I made in the whole building, because Susan and I and everybody, my kids were even looking at it going, hey, Dad, you know, and we walked through it, did everything, because I know any change orders in building cost you a lot of money. So, I mean, I knew that building inside and out, everything, and that's the only change that we did during my whole construction.
And for both of you, what was the initial public reaction? Was it always positive, or was there backlash?
You know, that's a great question. Yeah, it was very positive. We did have an architect, a very famous architect from New York, who was at Post Ranch, and he didn't understand. And
you're not going to drop the name.
I'm not going to drop the name. Okay. But yeah, he said to me, I don't understand this at all. No. And one of America's most famous architects. And it was really, from New York, and it was really fascinating to have that conversation. And, but overall, the response, like I said, the response from the architecture is incredible. Partly because, and I learned this from Mickey, and I learned this from a lot of the people here, is that design changes your life. I mean, the number of people who come to Post Ranch and leave saying, this place changed my life. And yes, it's the staff, yes, it's the view, yes, it's the privacy, but so much of it is the architecture and design and the attention to detail. And it's interesting too, there's one of my closest friends, an investor, a gentleman by the name of Paul Witt, who did 2 of Mickey's houses in Big Sur. He did a small house, which was shown. I think it's one of the most amazing houses that Mickey ever did. And then he did a larger house, which made the cover of Architectural Digest. This is just a few years after Post opened. And the following year, Mickey was voted one of the top 100 architects in the world. So if that doesn't express his abilities and what Mickey did, and his spirit and his free thinking. And I spoke this morning. I called. I never met Michelle Meunnig, and this morning I called her, and she goes, he'll be there in spirit, I promise you. He is a free thinker, and he's going to be looking over, and he's going to be smiling. He's a very, very, as Greg, and I think it's been mentioned, a very humble guy. And I think I got so much pride out of coming to Post, coming into the restaurant, and little secret that I don't know if anybody, Lydia, my wife, knows this, but if you see the shape of the restaurant, how it curves, there's one spot at Post Ranch that shape is of the coast. So Mickey not only shaped the ranch, I mean, did that, and he's got the little areas out there, little decks where you can sit, but that is the shape of the coast, and it's pretty amazing.
So the only one that didn't like it was an architect. That makes sense. So.
Well, actually, it's interesting because when the Post Ranch was finished, when we got it done, these hotel guys told us, well, it's never going to make it. It's not, you're going to just lose money and everything else. I said, no way, man. This thing is cool. Because everybody that was involved, as Mike said, it was not hotel people. Yeah. But we all would get together and have meetings. You know, his wife was a decorator at the time. And we'd all get together and discuss what we liked and what we didn't like. And one of the things and this is a Mike idea, I have to give that to you, is that there's no televisions in each of the rooms. And some people are just going, well, you can't do that because everybody's got to see the news in the morning and all this other kind of stuff. And Mike said, no, this is a place where people come to make love and to look at the views. and everything else, and it was spot on.
Yeah, and we did put music systems in the rooms, but what Greg just said was really, really interesting. So this, like I said, this was my first hotel, and I'm looking for financing. And I go to the Bank of San Francisco, and they said to me, we're going to do this loan for you, but you need to have a hotel financier, somebody who's going to give you more money than you have. And so I get a call from a gentleman, I'm not going to tell you his name, but he does own a hotel, or he did, he's no longer alive, a hotel in Monterey. And I walk into a restaurant called Roti in San Francisco, and I sit down, and he says to me, he goes, Mike, the bank says they're going to do the loan, and I'm going to give you the money, but I got one request I got one demand to get it. I said, great, what is it? And he said, you have to fire your architect. And I said, excuse me? And he said, you have to fire your architect because, Mike, everybody, you obviously have never done a hotel before. Everybody knows in the hotel business, first you got to hire a big architectural firm that does hotels, and second, you don't have triangles and how the hell are you going to put furniture in? And I said, his first name was Ellis, I'll tell you. I said, Ellis, this is the shortest lunch. I said, I'd love to take your money, but I'm not firing Mickey Meunnig. And I said, but I'm going to buy you lunch, but I'm not going to join you. And I got up and walked out.
I want to.
And one of the best decisions of my life.
Well, with that,
Did he ever buy you lunch?
No. He never would talk to me after that.
with that, we have a wonderful garden party afterwards, and I just want to thank you both for standing up for Mickey and great architecture. And thank you for all being here.
And thank you all.
Thank you.